Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday. Oh, no. It is Friday, December 13th. That makes it Friday the 13th. December 13th, 2019. How many Friday the 13th shows have we done? Someone new with a calendar function, or perhaps we could get Rain Man to tell us how many times we might have done Friday the 13th shows if we give him the right start date. Okay. Well, I wasn't planning on this. But, I don't know how much planning really needs to go into a Friday the 13th show. We're done. We're leaving. Am I superstitious about such things? Only to the extent that once you announce something dumb like that, your mind is on it, and then weird things begin to happen, and you give them strange explanations. So, all right. Yeah, I guess maybe a little bit. All right, Daily Co's Radio is live now, despite the fact that it's Friday the 13th. Kagro X, me, David Waldman. Despite the fact that it's Friday the 13th, we'll tell you what's going on by asking Bill in Portland, Maine. He's not here. He's got no idea. He's making it up just like I am. And it's about as accurate as any prediction I intend to make about what we're going to do today. Today, I'll say that Labour lost yesterday in Britain. That's right. We did note that the elections were going on. We didn't know what was happening in them until now. Now we know. Labour lost. Bill's got his own explanation. I think it's because they have the extra letter in Labour, and they don't understand that it's spelled L-A-B-U-R. Duh, Labour. Doesn't you hear it? I can't understand why you stick that extra O in there. Labour lost yesterday in Britain, which has an extra I in it, because they drive on the wrong side of the road and have too many crumpets. That's true. I did actually say that. And likely true. I mean, how many crumpets do you really need? First of all, if you already have trumpets, do you really need crumpets? I don't think so. I'm not really sure what they are. I think you know how it is in England. Drive on the wrong side of the road. They call ale beer. We figured, we'll meet you halfway and call the ginger ale. And you're like, no, it's ginger beer. And then it's crumpets. No, it's English muffins. I don't know. Chips, fries, the whole thing. It's, I know. They're not all the same thing, obviously. In some cases, they're quite different, I am sure. Driving on the wrong side of the road, that's your own fault, though. PolitiFact investigates and rules this claim to be half true, the crumpets part. Thanks, Bill. We got somewhere on this one. I don't know. I don't know where to go with today. What's the difference? Who cares? There's no such thing as elective politics, and I don't know. I'm not certain what to tell you about the outcome of the elections in Britain. I'm in no position to tell you anything about that, not least because I am American, and, two things. One, that means I'm not English and I don't know. And two, we're not doing so good over here either. So I can't shame anybody over there. And I don't know I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I am sorry to tell you that you're stuck with Boris Johnson again. I don't know whether I'm surprised by the numbers, I think. Although, all of the instant analysis from people who don't know anything at all says that Labour just wasn't putting forward national leadership candidates that anybody had any interest in. But, how can anybody have any interest in Boris Johnson either? I don't understand the idea that he would, now I'll deliver Brexit. The whole reason we're here. Well, okay. Whatever. I can't interpret things. I can tell you that I did see a comment go by yesterday while the returns were coming in that the Scottish constituencies elected something like 55 members of the Scottish National Party, and that there are only 50-something constituencies in Scotland at all. So Scotland represented almost entirely now by the Scottish National Party, and I guess if there's a move towards actually finalizing Brexit, I think I had understood that Remain sentiment was very strong in Scotland. And of course, we're only a few years removed from a serious Scottish independence referendum that only narrowly was turned back. And I assume that between the problems, the tensions there, the still looming issues of what to do with respect to the boundaries between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland once Brexit, I guess, if it actually goes through. You're going to, we may see a renewed Scottish independence movement just to over remaining integrated with Europe. I don't know. I don't know whether people are already talking about it and it's obvious there. It's possible that all Scottish people are speaking quite openly and loudly about it, but that we can't understand them. That is also a possibility. You never know. So I have to wait for the translation to come in. And as it turns out, no one in England understands them either, which is I find amazing. Every once in a while I'll run into British people who say, oh yeah, it's not that you Americans have difficulty understanding the Scottish accent, a really heavy Scottish accent. Nobody understands it. We don't get it either. No one knows what they're saying. So it's a big mystery, and I guess you have to wait for Scottish voters to write down their preference on a ballot and read it. And that way we can figure out what they're talking about. By the way, how do you spell Corbyn? My Twitter feed is full of spellings with B-Y-N at the end, C-O-R-B-Y-N, and I-N, and I can't tell whether that's, he's not Russian or Ukrainian, and we're not having a problem transliterating the name. It's written in English, right? And ordinarily I think I've seen it more with a Y, and I would assume that an I is just plain, misspelling, or somebody who's heard the name and never saw it written, whereas I have only seen it written and rarely heard it pronounced. But I think it was an actual publication that had put out the IN, if I'm not mistaken, although it may have been The Hill, and a lot of you guys don't consider The Hill to be a legitimate publication. Here it is, yeah. The Hill's tweet of 4 minutes ago, Jeremy Corbyn says he will not lead Labour Party in future elections after loss, which I think frequently happens. But they are Corbin in the tweet anyway. Now I'm curious to see what they have in their copy. Online it's, or rather in the body of their article, it's YN. So it's just a typo there. I was just worried that all of a sudden I had missed some new convention on how to spell his last name, like with Kiev, although at least the pronunciation changed there too. I think they did a pretty poor job in making their choices about the transliteration, but I assume that they just couldn't stomach going with Keev, even though we'd get that right more often, I think. Anyway, much to catch up on. It is a Friday, and there are many directions that we could be going, and we'll go in about 4 of them, as far as I can tell. I do owe this. Let me start with perhaps a more general news roundup. Pardon me. Tough morning today. By the way, school update for those of you keeping score at home, and I know that there are 0 of you doing that. I think there has been no precipitation whatsoever, and it is about 35 degrees, and we got an early morning call that school was delayed, but I guess they were concerned about possible icing on the roads and the big buses, and they're not real good on ice. And then we've never had this before, where we got the call early, and then a second call, follow-up call about half an hour later saying, you know what, we're closed. That was a fantasy of mine always when I was a kid growing up, and I think it's been a fantasy of my kids as well. They know when the phone rings. No other phone call will wake them up, but a 6 a.m. phone call during a school week will, during the winter anyway, will do the trick. And they always, hoped against hope that there would be, once we told them there was a delay, that there would be a cancellation afterwards. And today was the day, Friday the 13th. Maybe they're just superstitious, because there's no ice out there. There's no snow out there. And as far as I can tell, it's not even wet out there. So, I don't know. I think somebody hacked the weather system, the weather forecasting thing, and sent the right people the wrong forecast. And the kids are enjoying themselves. All right, let's see. Karen and Mike. Good morning, everybody. How you doing? Karen asks, I have leftover questions. If Corbyn is so unpopular, why does Labour continue to elect him leader? Well, I guess that answers the question. If you believe The Hill, even though they misspelled his name, he says he's not going to be the Labour leader anymore. And I find that difficult to dispute. Don't really know why that would have been a question. Think they should have answered it last time. Didn't really do it, but whatever. Mike Musson says, Corbyn is English, so it's spelled with a silent S instead of a silent Z. Sure, why not? And by the way, I like the spelling of instead that you've included here. Is that could be, you could convince me that was an English spelling. INSTAED. Instead. Maybe, why not? I like that. It's the reverse of what we're doing here. Just like driving. By the way, speaking of strange facts about driving, I think I learned something yesterday. I began rereading. Many of you, none of you, will remember that many years ago, I began on reading a gigantic book on the Plantagenet family, the Plantagenet line in English royalty. Learning a lot, and I never finished it, so I went back to finish it, and I realized I don't remember any of the things I read first. I'm rereading the whole book from the start, and here's I think I've pulled a factoid out of here, but they begin with the story of, well, a shipwreck that changes the fate of the Norman conquerors line of royalty, beginning with William the Conqueror. And I guess, pardon me, it was really a rough morning today, that his grandson, who was in line to inherit the throne after his two sons had taken the throne, right? William the Conqueror, William II, and then Henry is king, and his son, also named William, they were very creative back then, all set to take over. And he was basically out having a party on a boat, which, kids today and in the 1100s did just the same. And but this party boat was over in France and crossing the English Channel on the way back to England. And presumably they were going to have a giant party. Jeremy Corbyn apparently was steering the boat, and it sank. And William dies. But that's not what I learned. I learned that too, but that's not new. What was interesting was they're piloting the boat, and this long ship that they had. Remember, we're talking about like the 1100s, so they're still basically proto-Vikings at that point. So they're steering this long ship, and for whatever reason, I don't know whether they hadn't invented this technology yet, but the rudder that they're using for the ship is not one of those centered rudders that we're used to seeing on a boat now, and maybe this is part of the reason. They just sort of attached the rudder, and you all know what a rudder is like, but which they called, what a rudder is for, right? It's steering the boat, and it's a big board that sticks down into the water, and you turn it and changes the direction of the flow of the water, and you turn the direction of the boat. The board that they use for steering, or the steer board, that's what they said they called it. That's right in the book. The steer board was attached to the right side of the boat. And, it steers effectively enough, but you can't really see what's going on the left side of the boat while you're steering. But what I learned there is, why do we have this stupid name? The left side of the boat should be the left. I don't know why it's not, but it isn't. It's port. I don't know what the story is about that. They didn't discuss that. But the right side, the starboard, is where the steer board goes. Isn't that fascinating? Now you know exactly what's happening in politics in the United States of America. Happy Friday the 13th, everybody. Be on your way. All right. We'll call it a warm-up story. There's a lot of other interesting stories out there that happened in this century that I could share with you. By the way, I'll make passing comment on what I have discovered to be one of the hottest trends in responsible gun ownership today. We haven't talked guns in a long time, and I have a couple of stories on that. But the hot trend in gun ownership in the last week or so, it's everywhere, is stashing your pistol in your child's car seat. It's been fantastic. It's worked out beautifully in the last couple of days. Two stories, both came through the Twitter transom within minutes of one another for me yesterday. I think they're actually a few days apart, but I just about at the same time saw a story forwarded to us by Scott Charles, who was sharing an Illinois story about a woman arrested with an AR-15 in the car trunk and a second gun in the child's safety seat, which is exactly where you want the thing. Now, no tragedy resulted from that incident, but within minutes, I also saw, shared by SFDB, our gun fail curious friend from Twitter, who shared this story from the Miami Herald, in which a woman driving car. Well, here's what happened. 3-year-old boy finds dad's gun under the car seat and shoots mom. The boy's 1-year-old sister, who was also in the car, is okay. But here we have straight up, another type of gun fail. I guess they're both gun fails in their own way. And I just thought, illustrative of where we're going. We don't seem to be making any progress in fixing this stuff. And then this morning, somebody sent me another story from Georgia, but this time it was, again, a young child who finds the gun, fires it, and kills one of his siblings, but this gun was in the center console of the car. That one was an interesting story all by itself. We've seen that exact scenario 100 times, and it's not the car seat. So it is a little bit different, but, I think what fascinated me about it was that this had happened down in Georgia. And I think the story was about the minor outrage in the area that there had been no charges filed against the parents, not even any sort of negligence charges. And people were, I guess the sentiment in the article was, how do you interpret leaving a loaded pistol in a center console as non-negligent? It was, Francis Wilkinson has sent this one on to me. And Francis, a member of the editorial board at Bloomberg Opinion, and it's real interesting. He's a verified checkmark kind of guy and everything. And he sent it along with my comment on my tweet yesterday about the hottest trends for responsible gun owners. This is, like I said, it wasn't in the center, or it wasn't in the car seat, but his own piece. It's his own opinion piece about what happened in Georgia. And I don't know whether he was rounding up any public opinion or not. Maybe it was just his own. But his own piece, I thought it was really interesting way of putting it together. But just long-ish story short, the question is, how is the sheriff's department, I guess the local prosecutor chooses to make no charges. And the sheriff's department, in handling the incident with the press, is explaining to everybody, well, they didn't leave their gun unsecured, so there's no negligence here. And the question is, how is leaving a loaded pistol in the center console, which doesn't lock, in the family car along with your 3 kids unsupervised, how's that not failing to secure your weapon? And they're like, well, it's not like it was out on a table. And I guess, in some places with some sheriffs, that's what they consider to be a weapon that's secured. Like we put it in the cookie jar. What's the problem? It was a closed container, right? But it's a kind of a national problem. And, what can I tell you? People have gotten used to it. And we still, to this day, find no real coverage of the issue of accidental gun deaths. Of course, there's lots of people who argue with even using the word accidental. That's a whole discussion we could have on the side. But I thought Francis made some very good points in a relatively lengthy piece about this, and I'll share it with you and put it in the queue to share in the roundup for today. But some excellent points. And he makes some other great points in here as well, just about how we were sort of numb to this as a story and how the data collection on the issue is abysmal. And we're getting a little bit better with it, but only because there are private efforts to do this, including my own, which was essentially priced out of the market by other professionalized operations. And of course, the crush of news under the Trump administration. There was just simply no more time to do this uncompensated and, I guess I had thought, uncompensatable work. But then I found out that other people were getting compensated for it pretty good, just not doing it the same way. But all right, so out of the field for me. But a good point made, and my hope eventually, compensation or not, and the answer is not, was to raise enough awareness of the issue that maybe somebody who would be able to figure out how to get compensated for it would be able to pick up the mantle, that journalists would notice that this was a huge problem that was going under discussed at the very least. And, maybe some professional organizations would pick up on the numbers and take it and run with it. And we've seen a little bit of that. Certainly a little bit more awareness in the press. Certainly Francis became aware of it enough to write this rather lengthy and sensitive treatment of the situation. But I've seen others, and they're here in pocket. What was the other evidence I had of this the other day? Oh, yeah, here we are. An AP piece from, I don't know, a while ago. Not that long ago. Let me bring up the original so I get all the info and the dates here. December 9th. Martha, is this Belle-Isle? Is it Bellisle, like Belle Isle? What a nice island this is, except no E on the end of Belle, which is fine. They don't need it. So the AP's story was entitled Accidental Shootings. See, my area. Accidental shootings raise questions about arming teachers, which, as it happens, was the actual original motivation of compiling Gunfail, because this was in the wake of the December 14th shootings in, what became more commonly, despite our efforts, more commonly known as the Sandy Hook shootings. The response, of course, from the NRA, we got to arm teachers. There's got to be guns in schools to defend against such things. And, that seemed rather ludicrous to most people, I think. But there were some questions about it. And I guess I thought that they might stem from people's belief that, generally speaking, guns don't just accidentally go off all over the place. And that's true. The guns themselves don't accidentally go off. The problem is that they are often paired with humans, and humans do a lot of things either accidentally or stupidly. And, the guns just do what they're supposed to do for the most part. Anyway, so there's lots of issues. And then, of course, that in combination with the NRA's immediate push for a gun appreciation day, which they pushed the next month, January 20th, I believe it was, of 2000, what are we talking about, 13? And they declared it to be, the story. They declared it to be Gun Appreciation Day, and they had gun shows all over the country. There were gun shows anyway. They didn't schedule them just for that. But that was the day that I found 3 separate accidental discharges at the gun shows, where everybody loves guns and talks about how responsible they are with their guns. They had the 3 accidental discharges. I think 5 people shot in 3 different locations around the country. And it made me wonder, is that unusual, or are guns, quote unquote, accidentally being fired all over the country all the time? And I just started, let's just look at the damn newspapers and find out. And as it turns out, that's what was happening. And if that was what happening with regular guns in regular day-to-day situations, it was almost guaranteed to happen in a school setting if we just put guns and people in that school setting too. That was what I was looking for originally. Those, thankfully, are fewer in number than the number of people who accidentally shoot themselves, quote-unquote, cleaning their guns or whatever, or out hunting. That's obvious. I mean, you're supposed to be shooting guns when you're out hunting. But I was hoping somebody would start to look at this, and they did. And in this case, I mean, we've seen it before, a few other reports, but in this case, Martha Belisle, reporting from Seattle, in this case. So we'll use up the minute or so before our first break, giving you a flavor of what's in this AP piece. As the country looks for ways to deal with mass shootings at schools, some have responded by saying more people should carry guns, including teachers. There's, of course, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Trump repeating the NRA line at their convention in April. More states are allowing teachers to carry guns, he said, and who better to protect our children than our teachers who love them? Well, anybody really, but a close look at unintentional shootings by law enforcement officers, including at schools, raises doubts about whether more guns would help keep students safe. Yes, what a good idea it would be to look at such a thing. If only we could find someone willing to do it. An Associated Press investigation has found, can you believe it? They investigated. Accidental shootings occur at law enforcement agencies, large and small, across the United States every year. What an in-depth investigation that must be. The examination of public records and media reports documented 1,422 unintentional shootings by officers at 258 agencies since 2012, which is weird because that's about when I started measuring too. But okay, I'm glad for the additional coverage of the issue. And like I said, I've gotten out of that business, so it's not too bad. 22 occurred at schools or college campuses. At least 9 states have passed laws allowing employees to carry firearms at K-12 school grounds, according to the National School Boards Association. 19 states allow anyone with permission from a school authority to be armed at schools, the association said. So look, the AP is actually doing a better job rounding up the facts here and doing the research. And it's very interesting what they've come up with, and I'm glad someone's done it and is presenting it to the American people. Hooray! Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue on. I have to just take a break. As I said in the Morning Post today, I don't remember what I talked about when I wrote the damn thing. Anyway, the Judiciary Committee markup of the articles of impeachment was suspended late last night with, I think, just the votes pending before the committee. But I think they wrapped things up almost 11 o'clock, maybe even a little later than that. And Chairman Nadler decided to wait and hold the votes this morning. And I'm sure the Republicans, it turns out, believed, and they may even be right, and it's not even a bad decision, that he was just delaying things so that they could get better television coverage and better viewing hours for the vote in the morning. And quite honestly, this is a vote that should be viewed by everyone in America, except me, because I'm busy doing a podcast at the moment, and I'm a little bitter about that. But I don't know. Anyway, though, as it turns out, let's see. What do we have here? We have the tweet of Bobby Lewis of Media Matters, noting for the record here that Ainsley Earhart, who is that? Is that a Fox and Friends person? Complains that Nadler is delaying the impeachment vote until today, that it kept members of Congress from going home, quote, for the holidays, all because of TV ratings. And of course, I think what we're meant to do with this is to grab, the fact that Friday the 13th is now a holiday, for conservatives, I guess, and that's probably because they're fake pagan witches now who sacrifice Christian children and drink their blood. I think that's probably well known by now, but you might as well run with it. The Republicans certainly would. And others, Jay included, tweeting as Touchdown Jesus. How do you like that? Letting everybody know that once again, Fox notes for everybody that they're celebrating the holidays. It's Christmas. Typical liberal Fox. Quite, again, a good point. All right. I'll retweet that one around you down there for everybody who's listening live. Just trying to keep one eye on what's happening elsewhere on Twitter. But now back to the AP story, because it is Friday. We like to change directions from time to time in a Friday show. And I enjoy the fact that AP has picked this up, taken it seriously, and married the the available statistics that have been gathered already about accidental shootings of various kinds, taken this very specific kind and done some additional original reporting and research to pair it up and make a really powerful story out of it. So, what we learned from their review was that their examination of public records documented over 1,400 unintentional shootings by police officers or law enforcement, or I don't know whether they included private security in that or not, but there are many by private security as well. So you could probably add to the total, but they might be talking about sworn officers. 1,422 unintentional shootings by officers at 258 agencies since 2012. 22 occurring at schools or college campuses. I think I found just maybe about that number and a few more. But I found many over the years as well. Then they note at least 9 states allow employees to carry firearms on school grounds, and that 19 states allow anyone with permission from a school authority to be armed at schools, according to the National School Boards Association. Experts, they continue, say anybody carrying guns, including teachers, needs ongoing intensive training to be able to handle their firearms proficiently and respond appropriately in stressful settings, and many law enforcement officers don't even get that. That is a good point. And I mean, I think when the solution, quote unquote solution of having teachers carry guns was presented, I mean, it came up, but the gun people basically relied on either ignorance or whatever about guns among the general populace and among gun owners as well, I think, to just sort of blow past that point that, as experts say, that if you're really carrying guns and you're carrying guns all the time, and especially around other people, and with the intention of using it for defense in a crowded situation at that, you would need ongoing intensive training, and many police officers don't even get that. But some police officers do, and yet nonetheless we see 1,400 plus accidental shootings at 258 police agencies across the country, right? So maybe those are all the untrained guys. Maybe, maybe not. I mean, I certainly had plenty of stories about gun safety trainers who accidentally shot themselves or others. It's just statistically going to happen around anything. And when it happens around guns, the results are flashy and tend to draw press attention. And that is because, of course, guns are handheld instant death machines. And I mean, the same rate of accidents may obtain with sharpened pencils. It's true. They get misused frequently. People are even poked in the eye. Damage is done, I am sure, around the country. You probably find, I don't know, 25 people around the country in any given year who have major damage done to them with a pencil. And that's sort of the sort of thing that gun enthusiasts usually point out and say, lots of things are dangerous. You're going to ban them all? No, not necessarily. Just the ones that are handheld instant death machines. The worst thing that can go wrong with the pencil, I mean, you could get killed with a pencil, but it has to be an extraordinary accident for someone to be killed or even badly injured by a pencil, even a mishandled or malhandled pencil. Whereas and that's because it's a writing implement and not a handheld instant death machine. And something that fires projectiles out at speeds capable of crushing anything that it comes in contact with. whether it's, skin or bone, that's going to cause bigger problems. That's not what happens with pencils. Anyway, so as I said, anybody carrying guns needs ongoing training. And so the thought was, well, we'll just give them that training without regard, of course, to cost. No one ever asks, how are we going to pay for that? You all know that's a typical day. Any given day on the show, we note that, when it comes to something conservatives want, who cares? Nobody ever asks that question. When it comes to something liberals want, how are we going to pay for it? And then there were some proposals. Well, we'll put police officers. There'll be more school resource officers. We'll put them there. They're already getting the training. Or the school system will train people. Or the school system will reimburse people for pursuing their own private training. Or, we'll let teachers who own guns personally and are presumably therefore proficient because they've had training, because most people still believe that there's required training in order to get a gun permit in any state, but in many states there's just not, or the training is ludicrously inadequate or sometimes non-existent. Literally non-existent, or sometimes it's you take a 4-hour course in which you might or might not actually handle a weapon at all. Anyway, no thought really given to not only what the impact of trying to add this to teacher responsibilities was going to be, but how much training and what the cost might be to actually keep a proficient force available for the protection of even some small portion of America's school children. Anyway, continuing on with the coherent thoughts of the AP, the idea that anybody can go to Joe Smith's School of Shooting for a day or a week and become proficient at shooting a handgun in a life-and-death situation is a little bit absurd, said Doug Tangen, firearms program manager at the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission, the State Police Academy. Shooting a gun requires psychomotor skills. How do you like that? That must be practiced over and over, he said. Most people, cops included, don't devote that practice time to be able to shoot it responsibly or carry it responsibly, he said. You only have to look back a week or so to the situation. Where was it? Was it also in Florida? I think so. In the Miami area, perhaps, where the hijacked UPS truck was surrounded by police. A gun battle ensued, and though they shot the armed robbers, they also shot and killed the hostage, the UPS truck driver, and nearby bystanders in traffic that the truck unfortunately stopped in. And, well, what happened to good guy with the gun in that one? They were there, lots of them. Then they had lots of guns, and guess what? Lots of people died, including not the bad guys. The AP's investigation found 6 accidental shootings that involved officers responding to reports of active shooters. I remember a couple of these, too. Let's see. In 2016, for example, local, state, and federal officers rushed to Alpine High School in the small town of Alpine, Texas, when a call came in about 2 shooters inside. Exactly the situation you're worried about, right? A half dozen heavily armed officers and agents headed toward the cafeteria and then down the hallway toward classroom number 24, thinking the shooter might be inside. Just as Homeland Security Investigations Special Agent John Dangle touched the doorknob, a shot rang out and he fell to the floor. The other officers grabbed him by his bulletproof vest and dragged him to safety. No one knew where the shot came from or who fired it, Dangle said. We thought the shooter was in that classroom, which still contained a teacher and students, he told the AP. If they, the other agents, had opened fire, more would be dead. U.S. Marshal, so what are we talking about here? Did this actually clear it up or not? They just said that this was, okay, here's the answer. It's just on the other side of this picture. U.S. Marshal Doug Mullins eventually admitted he had accidentally discharged his weapon. Oh dear, wait, I have a sound effect for that. Thankfully, the guy's not dead, but geez. U.S. Marshal Douglas Mullins eventually admitted this. He was carrying a ballistic shield in one hand and fumbling with a handgun in the other when it went off. It did, even here, and even in this article. It went off when he fired it, according to the Texas Rangers who investigated the shooting. This is one of the other, things I discovered in investigating the gun fail situation in the country is how much of the reporting actually relies on either bizarre framing, passive voice, what have you. But it very often begins with the police, the local cops, briefing reporters who just sort of parrot the same language back, but sometimes it comes from reporters directly. And very often the cops are kind of pro-gun, and they say things like, particularly when they're reporting accidents, that a gun went off or someone dropped it and it fired. And along the way I learned, most guns, you drop them. That doesn't set modern guns off. But what was usually happening is people were saying, well, I dropped it and it went off. And then if you pressed them on it, it was, I dropped it, and as it was falling, I reached to catch it. And when I caught it by the grip and stuck my finger in the pistol, in the trigger guard, and trying to grab the thing out of thin air, I squeezed the trigger and it went off. That's how dropping the gun makes the gun go off. There are older guns and guns without trigger guards that can go off when you drop them, but apparently the word is that a well-built modern semi-automatic weapon will not fire when you drop it. But we do find lots of people saying that it did. Anyway, so here's the situation, right? We got an active shooter in a school. Everybody runs to the school. They have their whole tactical drill. They approach the schoolroom, and whatever, the stupid tactical formation that they have, and they go to open the door, and bang, the guy who goes to open the door gets shot. So on the ground, of course, they think shooter in the classroom, and if everybody, wasn't, thank God they were well trained enough not to just panic and start filling the doorway with their own return fire, like the idiot cops did with the UPS guys. But they weren't well trained enough not to be running down the hall with a ballistic shield in one hand and a handgun in the other, and they couldn't manage the two of them. But that's just one. I mean, I certainly found lots of situations with accidental discharges when the cops were responding to active shooter situations. There was one in Connecticut, right up in Greg's neighborhood. I don't know, Connecticut, anywhere in Connecticut is Greg's neighborhood as far as I'm concerned. All right. Back to the story here. Dangle, the guy who got shot, suffered a shattered tibia and torn muscles and nerves. It's no joke, right? He was out of work for 15 months and eventually moved his family to Oklahoma so he could get better care. That's a story all by itself. And I think he moved to Oklahoma. I think what he means is he could afford more care because it's cheaper in Oklahoma. And there's a healthcare story for you and our listeners in the UK, who, congratulations, have bought themselves into a privatized healthcare system in the near future, from everything I understand about the reporting of the election issues there. But and another of the issues stemming out of gun fail stories I noticed, no doubt that though it is reported here that Dangle suffered a shattered tibia and torn muscles and nerves and was out of work for 15 months and had to move in order to be able to afford his own health care, because why expect any part of the government to pick up any of the expense of your shattered tibia and torn muscles and nerves and the rehab that goes with it, simply because you were injured on the job by a government employee in your government employment function yourself, right? No one's going to take care of you for that. Another womp womp story for everybody. But usually those things are reported in the moment when the top story is reported active shooter at a school, police officer injured, right? And they have to just cover it. And then they usually say it was a non-fatal injury. The police officer, who was unidentified at the time, is expected to recover. Right? God damn it, our expectation is you'll recover. Now get on it. But what's recovery? 15 months out of work, had to move to Oklahoma in order to afford his own health care, shattered tibia, torn muscles and nerves. He's never going to be back. Not 100%. The officers are expected to recover versus the reality is the officer is expected to have to leave the state and will likely never work in his profession again and walk with a limp for the rest of his life and have to go to physical therapy and God knows what else. And he'll probably be experiencing some considerable pain for the rest of his days as well. And hopefully that doesn't lead to prescription or overprescription of opiates and all of the attendant problems that sometimes go along with that. But we couldn't fit that into the Crime Beat article on day one. Dave Oney, a spokesman for the U.S. Marshals Service, said the agency does not discuss personnel matters when asked if Mullins faced any disciplinary action or charges. Other accidental shootings at schools occurred while officers chased or arrested suspects, taught gun safety classes, or attended school events while off duty, the AP found. Some injured officers, students, or teachers. Yes, it did. One happened the day after the mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Want to traumatize some kids? When a sheriff's deputy shot himself in the leg while responding to a report of a person with a gun at a school in neighboring Coconut Creek. How do you like that? Accident, and it gets a minute of reporting that day. Oh my goodness, how silly of him. He's shot himself in the leg. I hope he's okay. The officers are expected to recover. Shot himself in the leg. The other guy got shot in the leg. 15 months out of work. What happened to him? We don't know. Nobody knows. I mean, AP could have found out, but that wasn't the thrust of their story. Accidental shootings can occur when an officer is flush with adrenaline, gets startled, or simply loses his balance. Ways to avoid them include following firearms safety rules and training regularly and in settings that mirror real life, experts say. In other words, something teachers won't have the time or inclination to do. But what the hell? Give them some guns anyway. Stephen Karnazes, president of Ventura, California-based Advanced Tactical Training Institute, trains people in schools and churches to prepare for armed attacks. After taking clients through classroom safety sessions, Karnazes teaches firearms handling by, quote, making things as realistic as we can. If you're a person at a church or school and you want to carry a firearm, that commitment comes with a lot of responsibility, he said. You have to be a lifelong student and continue to train. Alan Gottlieb, founder of the Bellevue, Washington-based Second Amendment Foundation, supports arming teachers as a way to prevent violence, saying gun-free school zones are a target-rich environment for people who are crazy. You've heard this before. He believes the average gun owner engages in more training than police due to budget constraint, and says trained school personnel could do a better job protecting students. Just unpacking that for just a minute. It's probably true that police get less training than they need to due to budget constraints, but what makes anybody think that private average gun owners have a bigger budget for training than police departments do? They don't. Now, sometimes they'll train for fun because they just enjoy firearms as a hobby. But is it training? Is it the right kind of training? And is it enough? Anyway, so he thinks that the average gun owner should do better than the average cop. Yet many educators have resisted the idea that they should carry guns. National advocacy group Teach Plus in 2018 surveyed more than 1,200 teachers about being armed at schools, and 80% said they were strongly opposed. Also last year, the National Education Association, the country's largest teachers union, asked roughly 1,000 members if they'd be willing to carry a gun in school, even with training, and 82% said no. We reject the idea that putting more guns in schools will make schools safer, the group's president, Lily Esquilsen Garcia, told the AP. If a highly trained law enforcement officer can accidentally fire a weapon, let's talk about the third grade teacher with a loaded pistol in her purse. Good, true, excellent comment. The conclusion of the article, at last. We did get to the end of it. By the way, we have had that situation. I don't remember what grade she taught, but of course, the example I go back to all the time, the teacher in Utah, who, following the model of, well, if you have a gun yourself and you're an average private gun owner, you'll be able to handle your weapon while you're in school, and you'll have all the training you need because you love your hobby so much. You'll want to make it a part of your professional life. And she, of course, wore her gun daily, and by the way, along the way, breaking all the rules and all the protocols. We've been over this issue before, but that's a pet peeve of mine, for sure, that all of these safety rules that the pro-gun folks will tell you during the town hall meeting at which you consider the measure, the local measure, which would allow teachers to carry their weapons, will promise you up and down, well, we're going to have all these safety protocols. The guns have to stay hidden at all times. They can never be shown to the students. It should be kept a secret. Nobody should let anybody know that they're armed, and you have to keep the gun on you at all times. And of course, nobody says what happens if they just don't. Or even if the question is asked, they usually say, well, then that teacher would absolutely lose their right to carry that weapon in school. And everybody says, that sounds like it makes sense. That's a good rule. And in reality, what ends up happening is, of course, if the gun peeks out from underneath the teacher's sweater or whatever, and the kids see it and somebody says something, what was promised at the town hall was that teacher would lose their right to carry that weapon. But as everybody knows, the pro-gun people are going to show up and say, you're really going to expose the children in that classroom to mass murder because what? The sweater was a little shorter than she thought? And one time somebody saw 1 second of a little millimeter of a gun that of something they thought was a gun? And you're gonna expose your kids to massacre by a madman? Or, of course, they could go the Second Amendment route. You're going to take away her God-given right to defend herself and her students with her gun, just like the Constitution says she should, just because she... Well, that was the protocol. She broke the protocol. We either have a protocol or we don't. Well, then we don't. And then the truth comes out. We don't, and we don't care. And that teacher continued to do that and continued to break that protocol until those things that the protocol were intended to prevent, i.e. an accidental shooting. Finally, it all broke down, and we had the accidental shooting. And I guess, thankfully, we could say, she accidentally shot herself and no one else. Or I think in the revised version, she accidentally shot the toilet, and the shrapnel of the exploding toilet injured her. And she didn't technically shoot herself. But, in the meantime, she's expected to recover fully, by the way. But she doesn't teach anymore, I can tell you that. So lives were changed. That did happen. But, yeah, I mean, that's the bait and switch, right? Well, don't worry, we'll have all these safety protocols. And then, oh, hey, they're not using any of the safety protocols. Well, we're still not going to do anything about it. The guns still stay. We're really risking a lot here. Somebody's going to get shot. Oh, guns don't kill people. People kill people. All right, well, some people are going to kill themselves or shoot themselves or someone else, or at least a toilet. Nah, you're out of your mind. Blam. There it is. It happens. Well, to borrow from The Simpsons, it won't happen again. It better not. You're right. Okay. The old Chief Wiggum line. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Well, of course, by the way, that's a lie, and it will. And that doesn't even mention the very small number, admittedly, but the number of people that I found in the few years that I collected this information who are actually involved in more than one accidental discharge. So, we've had multiple time gun failures in the few years that I looked at a narrow slice of the problem. All right, well, that was more time than I thought I was going to spend on that, given that there's 2 to 15 hours worth of information out there that has nothing to do with any of that, and instead focuses on the fact that we may be in the middle of impeaching a president of the United States at this very moment. There's lots to discuss about that. By the way, a little bit more information. I think it might even be information that overlaps with or is identical to information we had identified earlier, but just to bring it back around to this point, my continued harping on the inability, I guess, of the press and everybody else to come to the realization that Trump and the Trump administration are lying about everything all the time, every time, and you should assume that anything that is said by the administration is false until you have seen paperwork that purports to prove that it is true, at which point you should set about investigating the truthfulness of the paperwork, and that you will find 90% of the time that is falsified as well, and it constitutes a second lie in this one problem. Okay, what do we mean here? The Los Angeles Times headline, millions in military aid at center of impeachment hasn't reached Ukraine. Remember, no harm, no foul. The money eventually was released and got there. So what's the big deal? Well, it didn't get there. That's the big deal. Molly O'Toole and Sarah Wire reporting yesterday for the LA Times. More than $20 million of the Pentagon aid at the center of the impeachment fight still hasn't reached Ukraine. Oh no. I wish somebody had told us that that might be the case. The continued delay undermines a key argument against impeachment from President Trump's Republican allies and a new legal memo from the White House Office of Management and Budget, which we read yesterday. And I don't know if we gave it the full treatment yesterday, but it occurred to me after I was explaining it on Twitter afterwards. I think we got around to it, but there's no reason to believe that that is true in the least, of course, not just because the Trump administration issued it, but because, as usual, it doesn't make any sense. The excuse was that OMB was following established procedure and that they really do have the right to hold up funding, as they say, as a programmatic delay. They used like lingo for, some legal jargon to explain it, hoping that people would say, oh, a programmatic delay. Well, I don't know what that means, but it must mean that it's the kind of delay that you can make to a program or something like that. Now, this sounds like a program, so it must be true. It's a programmatic delay. Programmatic delay, I mean, I think my best shot at unraveling what that jargon means is the OMB can delay the disbursement of funds when there's a programmatic delay in place. That is, the agency that administers the program says, we're having some trouble here and we're not able to do this correctly. And so if you released the funding to us, it would just sit in a bank account somewhere and either go unspent or be wasted because we're having trouble. For instance, if it's a program to distribute, guns to teachers throughout the United States of America, and, well, we ran out of guns. We bought all the guns, and now we have no more guns left, and there's no more guns available for the teachers. So there's no point in giving us the money to buy more guns until they're finished making more guns in Santa's workshop, right? That's a programmatic delay. We're out of guns, or we can't do the thing that we're supposed to do now or ever, so hold on to the money. That's not what happened here. They just used the lingo because that's the sort of delay that's allowed, so they just applied it to what they did. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Just taking a brief break about and collecting the thoughts here. So I don't know whether to continue on with the LA Times thing or continue on with the explanation. But as I said yesterday, I'm going to have to flip back to Pocket and the article that I archived about this. This was yesterday's Washington Post, right? In a new legal memo, White House Budget Office defends withholding aid to Ukraine. And again, the way they put it in the memo was, let's see if I can find that mention of programmatic delay. Like I said, a term of art of sorts that what they did was they said they were relying on previous opinions from the General Accounting Office. Here it is. The author of the memo asserts that while OMB must notify Congress before delaying allocation of some funds, the Ukraine assistance amounts to a programmatic delay that does not require notification, citing a prior GAO opinion. And, reporters, they're under deadline, whatever. It's a difficult thing to do, but, I did it in a short amount of time. Might say, what prior GAO opinion? May I see it? Of course, then they would say, no, you can't, because I never saw it. I just heard that there was a prior GAO opinion. Or someone may have said, someone who may have worked in the OMB for long enough says, we do have the right we can delay funding sometimes, and we don't have to notify Congress if there's a programmatic delay. And so I looked into it a little bit. Here's the deal. You have to notify Congress. That's the basic bottom line, and I kept saying that. And there is one exception, which is, of course, this programmatic delay. So what I think happened here is the author of the memo heard about that and just said, all right, well, then in that case, it was a programmatic delay because it was a program that we had and we delayed it. But it means something, programmatic delay. So there's two kinds of delays. I don't know what they call the other one, but essentially, the deal is, why do you have to notify Congress? And you have to notify Congress because of the anti-impoundment laws. This goes back to, Nixon at least, right? Where he came up with the idea of as a budget control, he would impound appropriated funds, in other words, defying Congress's control of the purse strings and imposing a one-person spending restraint, like a line item veto, which was something we came up with in the 80s and 90s to try to replace the idea of impoundment once that was found to be unconstitutional and then later unlawful. But the anti-impoundment statutes prevent the president or any part of the executive branch from simply changing their minds and saying, the Congress appropriated this, but the hell with that. We don't care. We're just not going to spend the money. If you freeze the funds, that's an impoundment. And an impoundment, even then, isn't necessarily by itself illegal or unconstitutional. There are certain procedures that you have to go through, including notification to Congress and an explanation for what you're doing. Congress should be given the opportunity to say, you know what, you're right. You make a good point. We changed our minds. Don't worry about it. Don't spend that money. In which case, there, no harm, no foul. I mean, I guess, except if you're the one expecting to get that money. But there, at least if Congress changes its mind, everything is okay. Whereas if Congress says, no, you got to go ahead and spend that money, then the OMB has to either release it or come up with some other explanation. It's now outside of the realm of permissible temporary hold and temporary impoundments. It becomes the bad kind of permanent impoundment that you can't do. The programmatic delay thing is a hair-splitting exercise in which the OMB and with the help of the GAO came up with this exception and, again, said if essentially not because we disagree with the program, but rather because something either beyond our control or unexpected, whatever, just simply makes it impossible to execute the program either temporarily or permanently, and it doesn't make any sense to release the money or spend the money, that's different. And not only that, but a programmatic delay is envisioned to be, generally speaking, temporary, because Congress can do a lot of dumb things, but you might be reasonably well served with the assumption that Congress won't authorize and then appropriate money for a program that doesn't exist and can't exist and for which they have made no provision for somebody to make it their business to make it exist. I mean, you might argue Space Force, but then we haven't gotten there yet. That might turn out to be the case. But somebody can say, look, my job is to make Space Force hats to raise awareness of Space Force and then give those hats to the acting chief of staff of the White House, and he'll wear them around and everyone will know that they're for sale on our website. And it's a good thing. It's actually a bad thing, but okay. But programmatic delays apparently don't require notification to Congress because, one, it's not a political decision to defy the will of Congress. It's a problem of implementing the program. And more often than not, notice will be made formally or informally anyway. At some point, either the people who aren't getting the money will say, hey, where's the money? And the answer to which will be, you're not getting the money because you can't do the thing. Or when Congress finds out about it, then they say, well, this, and this is what happened a couple of times. The money's been set aside and Congress has said, this is an impoundment. You were supposed to notify us. And they don't necessarily sue over it, but they write a letter to OMB and GAO and complain about it and say, we'd like you to look into this. Why wasn't I notified? And sometimes the answer comes back, well, we looked into it. It's a genuine programmatic delay. And it's the intention of OMB to get this money spent as soon as the gun factories start up again. That's the difference between programmatic delay and an impoundment. But they didn't bother to go into that in the memo, as far as I can tell from this article. It may be that the memo is very detailed, and we could probably spend some time reading it. Maybe I'll do that over the weekend. Here it is. Read the memo here. I have a feeling, though, we'll be disappointed in what they have to say. It's 9 pages long, and I'm not going to read it now. But at any rate, that little problem of interpretation and that loophole that they thought they could fit through because no one would ask. Does that work in this situation? Apparently it has, and it shields everybody from everything at this point. But in the meantime, the LA Times, among other outlets, has found some significant portion of the money not reaching Ukraine, and not because of a programmatic delay. There isn't one here. They're ready to receive that money and use it. So, the continued delay undermines a key argument against impeachment, as we found out, right? Namely that the money was sent. Initially, Trump directed officials to withhold roughly $400 million in assistance to Ukraine as he and aides pressured the new government, its new government under Volodymyr Zelensky, to open investigations into Trump's political rivals. The White House released the hold on the aid in September, but not before sparking a whistleblower complaint that led to the impeachment inquiry. On Thursday, as lawmakers on the House Judiciary Committee debated articles of impeachment, Republicans on the panel continued to assert that Trump did not abuse his power because the aid was released before Ukraine's new government announced any investigations. They got the money on September 11th, Jim Jordan, the liar, said of Ukraine in the Thursday hearing. That's what happened. It's not what happened. You can make up all the things you want, but those are not the facts. But $20.2 million of the Pentagon's $250 million portion of the aid, it's not quite 10%, has yet to reach Ukraine and remains in U.S. accounts, according to the Department of Defense and Senate aides. The OMB also released a new legal memo Wednesday night, arguing it did not violate the law because the aid to Ukraine was released after a temporary pause, quote, to study whether the spending complied with U.S. policy. It does. Everyone knew that. That was why it was appropriated. At no point during the pause did Defense Department lawyers tell the OMB that the hold on Ukrainian funding, quote, would prevent DoD from being able to obligate the funds before the end of the fiscal year, according to the memo, first reported by the Washington Post. Accordingly, the memo asserts withholding the aid had little impact. Several OMB officials resigned in part due to their concerns that the withholding was illegal, and witnesses from the Defense Department and other parts of the administration testified publicly in the impeachment inquiry that there was widespread concern that the aid could not be spent by September 30th, the end of the fiscal year, and would expire. When the Trump administration ultimately dropped its hold on the aid on September 11th, Republican and Democratic lawmakers alike had to scramble to save the money. Oh, we told you that. Just days shy of the deadline, they passed and Trump signed into law a year-long extension to allow the Pentagon to disperse the aid. But in late November, the Times reported that $35.2 million of the initially withheld Ukraine assistance still sat in the U.S. Treasury. About $15 million has been contracted out since then, leaving $20.2 million remaining in U.S. accounts, according to the Pentagon and Senate aides. So, in other words, I mean, what we're looking at here is they screwed the whole thing up. They delayed the money for too long under false pretenses. When the whistleblower revealed it and the Congress discovered it by sending people to Ukraine and asking how's it going with the money, and they say we didn't get it, right? Two ways to find that out. They ended up forcing it out, and then, of course, finding out, well, the fiscal year is ending too soon. They rescinded the money, $35.2 million of it, out of the nearly $400 million. Again, almost 10% was in jeopardy. They rescinded it and reappropriated it and extended it. So, caught holding up the money. Then they release the money. They say, we release the money. See, no harm, no foul. We release the money. Then we find out, well, actually, you only released about 90% of it. There's still $35 million sitting here. Oh, okay. Well, we'll take care of that. Here's some more money. Okay. And now we find out, still there's $20 million here. You had 35. You gave out essentially less than half of it. You're still holding on to $20 million. Why? Pentagon spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Carla M. Gleason told the Times on Thursday that the remaining Ukraine aid that has yet to be transferred to the U.S. military services and contracted out will be implemented as quickly as possible in accordance with contracting procedures and applicable law, echoing earlier statements from October and November. after which, of course, they still didn't do it. Letters from lawmakers to Defense Secretary Mark Esper and other officials seeking answers on the continued delay to dispersing the aid to Ukraine have gone unanswered, according to the Senate aides. A federal judge separately ruled last month that the Defense Department and OMB must provide documentation regarding the aid holdup by Thursday, yesterday, in response to public records requests. Anybody get it? I don't know. Who's suing? We can ask, and then we can go call them and find out. Let's see. Does it tell us who's doing it here? I'm reading from Axios here. Federal judge on Monday issued a preliminary injunction ordering the Department of Defense and the White House, OMB, to comply with the FOIA request for records relating to the Trump administration's freeze on security aid to Ukraine. We know why it matters. We know what kind of the details are. Doesn't say who's making the request, but there we are. The Center for Public Integrity, who's doing a lot of this work on this. And I'm glad they are, because if the memo and its claim the memo from yesterday's article that we read was correct, and there was, even if it was, whether it was a programmatic delay or any other kind of delay, if it was of the sort that was permissible, then there would be receipts all over the place. So a FOIA request would reveal, if it was responded to properly, would reveal that there are memos everywhere going back and forth between Congress, the departments, the White House, maybe even people in Ukraine, trying to figure out what is the problem. What is the programmatic delay? It's a programmatic delay, so you don't have to report anything. Tell me about the programmatic delay. What program is it, and what's the delay? There would be receipts. If they don't turn up, or they turn up and they're half-assed, or they don't say anything, or they say the wrong things, then we discover that the OMB's scrambling after the fact to try to justify the hold likewise doesn't hold up. That in itself is circumstantial evidence, once again, that the president did it for exactly the reason the president said he did it. And there's no coming up with nonsense after the fact to try to justify it. I think they should probably just give up now, because you know how it goes with Trump and paperwork. I guarantee you they have not done this correctly. There will be receipts everywhere if they had done it correctly, and if they had done it correctly, they would know that there were such receipts, and they would have released them. You wouldn't have to sue to get them out of their hands. Think about that. All right, so where were we? We still don't have a clear understanding of why this is taking so long, one Senate aide said. Gleason said the delay was due to requirements in the law that granted the Pentagon the extension to spend the Ukraine aid. So Colonel Gleason here says the problem is that there were requirements written into the continuing resolution that, reappropriated the previously rescinded unspent portion of the money. Specifically, she says, we needed to reach out to prospective vendors to obtain updated pricing data, she said. Delays in obtaining this information is impacting our overall timelines. But Senate staffers said that law contained no such requirements for the Pentagon to essentially start over on contracts. Remember, this was just leftover money. And of course, what are they buying? They're buying the Javelin missiles. Are we saying we don't know how much Javelins cost? Well, the price may have gone up, Christmas rush and all that sort of thing, I suppose. Yeah, I think we know how much that stuff costs. Meanwhile, the Ukraine aid remains a political football in the impeachment fight. At Thursday's hearing, where members are expected to approve forwarding the impeachment articles for a full House vote, that actually happening today, Republicans continued to argue that Trump was doing his job by withholding aid because of corruption concerns. Several Democrats noted that Trump didn't hold up millions of dollars for similar congressionally approved aid for Ukraine in his first 2 years of office. And remember, he always thought they were corrupt, right? And the attempts to get Ukraine to investigate Ukrainian energy company Burisma and board member Hunter Biden only began after polls showed the elder Biden beating Trump in the 2020 presidential elections, Democrats said. He released aid in 2017. He released aid in 2018. And suddenly he became concerned in 2019, right after Vice President Biden announced that he was going to run, Representative Pramila Jayapal said. Andy Biggs, the Republican from Arizona, responded that what changed is that Ukraine elected a new president, and Pentagon assurances that the money would be properly spent came under the previous administration. He said Trump released the aid on September 11th after Zelensky had signed new anti-corruption policies a few days before. Did he? Can we see him? There was concern whether Mr. Zelensky was the real deal, Biggs said, echoing, I think, what Pence had to say about this. The Defense Department certified to Congress on May 23rd that Ukraine had made progress on corruption that was legally required to get the aid released. More than a month after Zelensky won the presidency and days after his inauguration. That was 2 months before his July call with Trump that kicked off the historic events expected to culminate in a vote next week by the Democratic-led House to impeach the U.S. president. So there you have it. Once again, Biggs said, because on September 10th, he signed the new anti-corruption policies. We released it on September 11th, or he says a few days before. But as they pointed out here, the Pentagon was A-OK with that money going out the door on May 23rd. So, another big lie. Just thought we might unravel that and point out once again that, credulous White House reporters have walked away with the explanation that no harm, no foul, because the money was all sent eventually, even though it wasn't. And, the question to ask there is, can you prove it? And the answer is almost always no. And I know it feels ridiculous, because in previous administrations, you would have been laughed out of the room. Well, can you prove it? Well, yeah, I can, but ordinarily we're not asked to do that because there's consequences to saying that it was done when it really wasn't. But yeah, we can go and get the records, and then they go and they get the records, and they show what they show, and everybody rolls their eyes at the crank who says, can you prove it? But in this administration, you'd be like the Woodward and Bernstein of the day. You'd constantly be scooping everybody if you would just ask for the proof. The Center for Public Integrity is doing it, but to no one's notice, except us. We keep having to call their name. BuzzFeed has actually done pretty well with a lot of that too, and a lot of the FOIA suits, and that's, I guess, because they have that one reporter. Several, I guess, reporters who are consistently doing this. Is it Leopold, he loves the FOIA suits, and he's working for BuzzFeed these days, and I think he's taught a couple of the other ones. You can always get a scoop for yourself through FOIA suits, but you should probably also be trumpeting your record about that beforehand and just say, watch this. I'm just going to go in there and say, bullshit, crap. See? Caught myself there. See, I said it was a clean show up until today, didn't I? You know what I was going to say. And I think you can still get away with that even under the FCC rules, which don't apply here. But, we just like to keep it, I don't know. Somehow it's more traditional to do things this way. I'm very conservative at heart. All right. Let's see. Other issues that I wanted to bring up. There's about 1 million of them. And I think we'll save this one for the last segment because that's very serious and somber, you see. And what else can we fit in before our next break comes? We shared those articles, opinion pieces about impeaching Barr. And, yes, this was an interesting bit here, too. Politico reporting this one. So I don't know if we made mention of this along the way, but you may have seen it in your travels, since we all seem to move in the same circles here. But Vice President Pence's office apparently was called upon recently to declassify parts of the testimony given to the Intelligence Committee by one of his aides, who I guess in testifying behind closed doors was Jennifer Williams, I believe, whose testimony was partially classified. But Adam Schiff, as chair of the committee, requested that the vice president declassify certain portions so that they could be released to the public. Well, Pence has rejected calls to declassify the new impeachment testimony, and you'll never guess why. This will chafe with some of you. Kyle Cheney and Andrew Desiderio for Politico on this one. Vice President Pence's counsel rejected House Democrats' request to declassify details of a September 18th call between Pence and Ukraine's president calling the request illegitimate because the impeachment inquiry has concluded. How do you like that? Remember that for the longest time, Republicans were saying, well, we don't have to give you this information. And we said, yes, you do. It's been subpoenaed. And they say, well, we have executive privilege. And then we said, well, or courts along with us agreed, well, your claim would be a lot stronger. You would be able to defeat the claim of privilege in the context of an impeachment inquiry. And so an impeachment inquiry was launched. It was going to be launched anyway. So they said, all right, well, now we have an impeachment inquiry. You have to give us the information. The information that was already being requested, of course, for the most part, did end up getting released. But then other information that they requested along the way, they did exactly pretty much what we said they would do. If a lawsuit is pending saying you must release document A because this law, and they lose the suit, and they appeal, and again, if they continue to lose, eventually, sometimes, usually with in other administrations, it's almost always, but with this one, they just, continue to say no. But occasionally they would say, all right, well, we lost the appeal. Here's the document. And of course, it's a smoking gun, and they use it against them. But then they say, you know what? It leads us to document B. We need to get a hold of that. And they make the same claim and say, no, same privilege is asserted. But you just lost that before the Supreme Court. There is no such privilege. But that was with respect to document A, and this is document B. Sue us again. And sometimes we end up getting stuck. All right, well, we will sue again, even though that's foolish. But, the point is they intend to use every barrier they can. So anyway, here they are refusing to release this thing, and they say, well, we'll listen to the court when they say we have to release it in the impeachment context. Impeachment begins, they release document A. Document B is discovered. We do the same thing. They say this is document B. No, that's ridiculous. We'll go to court, but the court is just going to say, that's crazy. It's a stupid interpretation of the precedential value of the first decision we gave you a week ago. This is the same sort of document. You're making the same claim. We defeated that claim. Give them the document. At which point, they may or may not appeal or whatever, but at some point they agree, all right, we may be over a barrel here. But look, the impeachment inquiry has ended. Now, of course, when they said that the impeachment inquiry had concluded, it hadn't, and it still hasn't, but that doesn't matter. They want that adjudicated. Maybe by the time we get to court over it, it may absolutely have concluded at that point. And of course, this also has the effect of saying that, we won't give you a document unless you start an impeachment inquiry. All right, here's an impeachment inquiry. Okay, well, we won't give you the document because the impeachment inquiry is over. What? Yeah, well, so that's the claim. In a letter to House Intelligence Committee Chairman Schiff, Pence's lawyer, Matthew Morgan, says it serves no purpose to declassify supplemental testimony from one of Pence's national security aides, as Schiff had demanded. Quote, at this point, the Intelligence Committee's oversight authority is limited to those areas in which it may potentially legislate or appropriate, Morgan wrote to Schiff, who pressed Pence last week to declassify supplemental testimony from one of the vice president's national security aides, Jennifer Williams. The additional testimony, Schiff said, centers on Pence's September 18th phone call with President Vladimir Zelensky. Earlier Wednesday, Schiff formally transmitted the classified testimony to the House Judiciary Committee, which began debating articles of impeachment late Wednesday night. Morgan also appears to rebuke Williams, writing that the contents of a classified call with the foreign head of state should never have been discussed in an unclassified committee hearing or an unclassified deposition. The letter is the second rebuke by the Vice President's office to House Democrats' request for assistance with the ongoing impeachment inquiry. The first came in mid-October when Morgan said the House's inquiry was invalid because there had not been a vote to authorize it, a position a federal judge recently rejected as unnecessary. And again, here, the same sort of flim-flam going on here. We won't give you the information because your impeachment inquiry is invalid because there hasn't been a vote. And now, of course, that they're voting to report out the articles of impeachment in the Judiciary Committee, the new position is, well, we won't give you the information you need because you have had a vote. So, coming and going, They appear to have us on that one, except, the judges don't agree. Democrats have made no pronouncements that their impeachment inquiry has formally concluded. In fact, Schiff has indicated he'd consider filing supplemental reports to the Judiciary Committee if more evidence emerged in the fast-moving investigation. So we do have that still hanging out there. I think that's all we're going to fit in before the break. We'll return. We've got more to discuss about these matters and related matters, some of which very somber, I would say. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Trying to catch up with the mail as well. I've got a couple of conversations going on the side. And before we even get to the somber news, I think we get the picture with Pence's refusal here. But by the way, just in case you were wondering, and I did. Wait a second. I'm gonna have to pull back here for just a second. Where did I see? Yesterday, I noticed Digby rather indignantly retweeting something which struck me the same way. But what was it exactly? I'll see if I can find this retweet that she had shared. But it was, here we are. She's just saying here, let me bookmark this so everyone can see it later on. WTF, she asks. They're just considering this now? Those who follow me know I've been asking this question for weeks. I assumed they had at least considered this problem. I just couldn't figure out what they had decided. What was the issue? Kyle Cheney, whose article we were just reading. And is this the... No, different one. But anyway, the article, let me read his tweet about the article. New, he says, Democrats are beginning to confront a serious post-impeachment puzzle. What will they do if an undeterred president commits new high crimes after they've already deployed the most powerful tool in their arsenal? And I think the article is probably gives a little more consideration to it than just, gee whiz, they're beginning to consider this thing. But Digby is right to ask, you haven't given thought to this before? I mean, you must have, right? But sometimes we find out that they really haven't. But you don't even have to wait to find out that this is going to be the case. The reason that this came to mind is reading this article about Pence and his refusal to release this information. You're finding the same crimes being committed, high crimes and misdemeanors being committed over and over again. Not only just Rudy Giuliani in Ukraine continuing that actual, statutory crime, but the undesignated, at least statutorily speaking, crime of obstruction of Congress is ongoing as well. And that's one of the charges in the current articles. They're saying, Pence's position is that because you've formulated articles, your inquiry is over, and all further obstruction of Congress is unreachable, unless, I guess, you file new articles now. But I think maybe part of the reason why some of these articles are broad and vague is that you should be able to argue right away. Now, the obstruction continues. For instance, Mike Pence is doing it right now. Well, it's not listed here. Well, none of the things are listed, or perhaps they're listed as, the examples include but are not limited to X, Y, Z that we already know about. But A, B, and C may become known to us at a later date. I hope that the articles are flexible enough to deal with that. If not, brief reminder to everybody that there is no limitation on it. They could absolutely pass new articles later on if they felt they had the political will to do so. There is no double jeopardy prohibition on articles of impeachment. That's for criminal proceedings. You could, in theory, just send the same articles over and over and over again if you felt like it. You could certainly send new articles, different articles, same articles, but covering different examples of the same arguments. Or, by the way, also wanted to remind you that there is considerable flexibility for, there's less flexibility for the Senate in when they start the trial, but there's considerable flexibility in when the documents make it to the Senate. Remember all the explanations we gave about having to move the papers between the houses? That applies to impeachment just like anything else. And the House can find ways of taking its sweet time to send the documentation, the necessary documentation, over to the Senate, messaging it over to the Senate, and thereby, if they wish, delay the start of the Senate's proceedings. They can't start, and I say that in quotation marks, because you can do anything you want to with 51 votes, but technically speaking, under current understanding of the current rules, they can't begin their impeachment procedures in the Senate until the articles of impeachment arrive properly from the House. So they can delay things by dragging their feet in the delivery of the documents. And that brings me to the point that we've discussed before in places. Impeachment, unlike regular legislation, articles of impeachment survive the adjournment sine die of the Congress that wrote them. In other words, if for whatever reason, either because of a delay in delivering the papers or that the trial drags out for all this time, or however, I mean, it's unlikely, of course, but if come the end of 2020, we've had our elections, the new members aren't sworn in yet, but January 3rd, 2021 rolls around, and this current Congress expires and the new Congress is sworn in. All legislation, of course, that wasn't passed and signed by the president, etc., from the previous Congress is dissolved. It's lost. It doesn't have any effect. You can't just pick up where you left off. But with impeachment, you can, and impeachment survives. I don't think that's likely, but just to put it out there. And but another thing you could do is have articles of impeachment hanging out there and deliver them too late, or even deliver them to the next Congress if the Senate is more favorable. I mean, that is a possibility out there. You are allowed to do that. Just thought I would remind you of that. Okay, so let me jump off of this subject. Let me jump instead onto something else entirely that doesn't exactly flow from this and doesn't flow into the next subject likely to come up either, but for which I owe a mention because I've been holding on to it for too long. Let me see if I can scroll down to where it is. This is how long I've been holding on to it. We had an interesting contribution offered up by one of our listeners, and if I've done the job correctly here, I will have starred the mail here. Yes, just it's not out of keeping with the sort of thing that we cover on the show, but I never found a natural segue to it. So I'm going to make an unnatural segue to it. I heard from a listener who I think probably were safest as identifying to you by Twitter handle more than by real name. I never did. I'm not certain I got a clear answer on how she preferred to be identified. But you can find her on Twitter and likely elsewhere, and perhaps as a Daily Kos user as well, but on Twitter as the Barefoot Gardener. In fact, Barefoot Garden 2, but identifying as the Barefoot Gardener, but that's the actual handle. You'll find it at Barefoot Garden, not Gardener, but Barefoot Garden 2. And she has sent me this very interesting collection of articles about some weird unpleasantness that happens to have taken place recently in or around her hometown. From earlier in December is this piece in the Quad City Times. Political forum at Bettendorf Church warns of illegal aliens. That's in scare quotes. Non-white immigration and the extreme left. We find out that it is, in this case, what's his name? Nick Fuentes, the guy behind that weird splinter alt-right group that finds itself at war with Charlie Kirk and Turning Points USA, which reminds me that we have more information about Christiane Allen, who likewise works alongside him. Not only now, you know how she loves to inflate her resume at Turning Point USA, but also at the Falkirk Institute, or whatever they're calling the faked up think tank that they have, where they just mashed together the name Falwell and Kirk and made the Falkirk Institute out of it. And she's a fellow there now too. Anyway, but Nick Fuentes is the guy who is outflanking them from the right and causing them such problems. And it was our friend, the Barefoot Gardener's, to her great surprise, that she found out that Nick Fuentes was associated with and had turned up at this event, this political forum in the Quad Cities area. And we're talking about, like, I guess, the Davenport, Iowa area, and Bettendorf as well. And just kind of caught her by surprise that, hey, not only did I hear about it on Kagro in the morning, but it's actually happening here in my own neighborhood. And man, I wish I had known about it, because I would have gone out and protested. And here's the backstory of this thing. I mean, what's happening out there and maybe in your neighborhood. It was a Republican political rally complete with politicians, voter registration, and speeches about conservative issues. But unlike President Donald Trump's boisterous rallies, Monday night's forum at the Pleasant View Baptist Church in Bettendorf was often somber. And that wasn't even the somber issue I was going to bring up. But good, because I said it was going to be somber, and here it is. But that's because the topic was immigration, or, quote, the crisis of illegals, as one attendee put it. The packed church hall heard from several angel parents, you know them, the men and women whose children were killed by undocumented immigrants. I don't know what makes them angels. They're no angels. I don't know why. But you know how it goes. They spoke from a stage adorned with Christmas trees and an Iowa flag, which hung below a large cross. Their stories were often emotional, recounting some of the worst days of their lives. During intermissions, loudspeakers played Kanye West's newest album, Jesus is King. Okay. The parents came from East Iowa, from around the country to advocate for the end of illegal immigration, the construction of a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, and the re-election of Donald Trump in 2020. You're all a victim of illegal aliens in this room, whether you have had tragedy or not, said Marianne Mendoza, an angel mom from Arizona whose son, Sergeant Brandon Mendoza, and again, Mendoza, was killed 5 years ago in an auto accident. Cayenne and Bobby Michael of Florida spoke about their son, Brandon Randolph. Everybody's named Brandon. Wow. Who was killed 12 years ago by an allegedly twice deported illegal immigrant. We don't know whether that's really true. We don't hate immigrants, Cayenne said. We don't have that in us. We love immigrants. It's those who come here illegally who we hate, I guess, is the unspoken part of this. Okay, you get the idea. The final speaker, though, was Nick Fuentes, a far-right activist who attended the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, even though he's now trying to disunite, I guess, the right, and had been condemned by some on the political right, even, as racist. Fuentes railed against both illegal and legal migration due to the drastic consequences of immigration from non-European, non-white countries. Again, Fuentes. But whatever. He argued that immigration into the U.S. should be shut down so that a monoculture can be created for others to assimilate into. These demographic changes are actually quite drastic and will change the texture of our lives and the lives of our children and our children's children, Fuentes said. The mantra we've been pushed is that diversity is good. Driving around majority non-white neighborhoods of cities like Chicago, he said, show how demographic changes are not good. There's your proof. Democrats, the speaker said, prioritize illegal immigrants over everyday Americans, particularly in the criminal justice system, because they're getting a great shake from the criminal justice system, are the migrants of all types. Anyway, so, the regular complaints. They're given privileges, and they're given excuses, and they're given freedom. Deborah Elkins said of illegal immigrants. Her son, Aaron Joshua Hampton, was shot to death in November of 2018 by a man originally from Mexico, who authorities said, anyway, was in the U.S. illegally. And that's enough for me. By the way, what are all these people doing, putting themselves in situations where they're getting shot on the streets and in auto accidents? They're no angels. I don't know. I'm just saying. Anyway, the forum was hosted by the Scott County Teenage Republicans, a group founded in early 2019. Wow, going all the way back to early 2019 by Adam Parcell, a senior at West High School in Davenport. The group provides a, quote, safe place, isn't that funny, for young conservatives like himself, who have endured what Parcell described as ridicule, intimidation, and death threats in school. I've been marginalized, Parcell said. Imagine being a conservative teenage Republican in Davenport, Iowa. It's difficult to imagine how you could possibly get along there, isn't it? Well, anyway, I thought it was very interesting that they were able to lure Nick Fuentes all the way out to Davenport, Iowa, or I guess in this case, Bittendorf, for something, or Bettendorf for something like this. But I guess he's got a lot of time on his hands. But by the way, lest you think that the Quad Cities area is more than fertile ground for that kind of insanity, I do have this follow-up piece that she sent me by way of clarification. Quad Cityans distance themselves from far-right speaker at Bettendorf Immigration Forum. And that's good news. Both stories, I believe, both now blocked by pop-ups, but reported by Graham Ambrose of the Quad City Times. So just so we get up to date here, Quad City residents are distancing themselves from an incendiary far-right activist who delivered racist remarks Monday. Nice to just say it. Racist remarks Monday at a forum hosted by the Scott County Teenage Republicans. You racists. Nick Fuentes, a far-right provocateur from Chicagoland, known for espousing racist and anti-Semitic views, spoke for about 20 minutes at the end of the Quad Cities Immigration Forum, hosted at the Pleasant View Baptist Church in Bettendorf. Are church members distancing themselves? I wonder. Fuentes told the crowd about the drastic consequences, quote-unquote, of immigration from non-European, non-white countries. He said, you heard the whole thing about it, driving around in Chicago. Now, others who spoke at the forum are distancing themselves from Fuentes, who has become a darling of the far right. I had no idea who Fuentes was up until a few minutes ago, tweeted Bobby Schilling, former congressman and Republican candidate for Iowa's 2nd Congressional District, who spoke before Fuentes took the stage. His rhetoric is disgusting, and I want in no way to be associated with him. Too late for that. His racist, anti-Semitic comments do not reflect my own views. I proudly support Israel. That's not necessarily pro-Semitic, but okay. And I love people of all colors and ethnic backgrounds. That's nice. Fuentes was not originally billed to speak at the event. That's interesting. Which was mostly about illegal immigration. Several attendees said they did not know who Fuentes was before he spoke. Why is he there? Organizers declined to say how Fuentes came to speak at the forum and who had invited him. It's important. Think we should find out? I was not aware that Nick Fuentes was going to speak at the Scott County Teenage Republicans Forum until he began speaking. Tweeted, Mariannette, like Mariannette. Is she aware that, marionette, a different word? That seems like a bad combination, but okay. Mariannette Miller Meeks. Okay. People, look, Marjorie Mazgoli-Zvinsky was 3M. It's very popular. Anyway, she's a state senator and Republican candidate for Iowa's 2nd Congressional District as well, I guess running against Schilling. She, too, spoke before Fuentes. Fuentes' views are racist and anti-Semitic, and they in no way reflect my own. It sounds just like what the other guy said. Oh, look, this is pretty hilarious. By the way, those of you in the Quad City area who are Republicans, you're not listening. Republicans you're talking about a deep bench over there. You're going to have the choice for the 2nd Congressional District between Bobby Schilling, who says, I had no idea who Fuentes was up until a few minutes ago. His rhetoric is disgusting. I want no way to be associated with him. His racist, anti-Semitic statements do not reflect my own views. I proudly support Israel, and I love people of all colors and ethnic backgrounds. Aha! Would you like to respond, Marionette Miller Meeks? Well, look at the spectrum that they're dealing with here. Fuentes' views are racist and anti-Semitic, and they in no way reflect my own. There is no room in this country for racism, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, and hate. I have been a long supporter, that's what she says, not I've long been. I have been a long supporter of Israel and celebrate people of all backgrounds. Wow, so the choice is clear, don't you think? In an interview, Schilling added he thinks Fuentes' views are, he says bull S word, and Fuentes is completely off the wall. So that's good news. I mean, at least they're interested in distancing themselves, and I suppose that's... Even the Angel parents did it, too. Here's Marianne Mendoza. Remember, her son was Brandon Mendoza, the police sergeant killed in the car accident. We would never have spoken at the event had we known he was going to speak there. That's interesting. Mendoza said Fuentes weaseled his way into the program and was given time to speak only because another speaker had canceled. Schilling also confirmed that Fuentes is known for infiltrating Republican events. That's true. Adam Parcell, I guess, comments on this finally. He says, we would like to affirm the students' statements, the statements given by the Angel parents and decline to comment further. So I think Adam Parcell is your man there. He must have given out the invitation because he's not declining. He's not distancing himself on that one. Pastor Ed Heading of the Pleasant View Baptist Church declined to comment. The church's Facebook page was taken down as of Tuesday. Feels like everyone got snookered on that one. Here's the mother of the other Brandon, the one from Florida. Cayenne Michael, the mom of Brandon Randolph Michael, said, we're black and we have not a racial issue we have not a racial issue. That's interesting. When it comes to immigration. She added that we don't have any control over who comes onto the stage, and she absolutely disavows Fuentes. So, all around, I guess, good news in that he was rejected after the fact, but in the meantime, there he was, spending time on stage, polluting both the church and the Quad Cities area, and everybody had to sit there and absorb it. And, well, at least they know that they're supposed to distance themselves from it afterwards. So it was good exercise for the Republican candidates there, if nothing else. Okay. Moving on as we are moving to the end of the program. Thanks very much to our friend who I don't want to identify her by real name unless I get explicit permission to do so, but you can thank Barefoot Garden 2, our friend Barefoot Gardener, for sending that along to us. I wish, too, that you had known, but it seems like the organizers didn't even know that Fuentes was showing up, so maybe that was a wise move on their part, or maybe they're just trying to kid us. Pull the other leg, why don't you, guys? I think Adam Parcell seems like the guy responsible for that, but he's a teenager in high school, and you can't beat up on him too bad. Unless we're allowed to now, because Greta Thunberg took it on the chin yesterday from the president. So maybe. Don't really know. We'll have to catch up on what the latest is on whether or not we can beat up on young kids these days. All right. That leaves us, generally speaking, without the amount of time I needed to cover the number of things I have. We'll have to save the goofy new information on just what a ridiculous liar this other kid we have to beat up on, Christiane Allen, actually is. So, like I said, more information about her, ridiculous resume inflation, and being in way over her head. But that's nothing new. What I wanted to share here, I guess maybe we can fit in the closing minutes. The other somber news I saw shared yesterday on Twitter by Scott Lemieux, writing at Lawyers, Guns, and Money blog, commenting, I think, on work from, I think, Ian Millhiser, writing about this, and I don't know, I didn't read his piece, but let me jump in with Scott's, because I think he's making a good point, perhaps in conjunction with Millhiser. The man who stopped Obama from filling many judicial vacancies in exchange for nothing. is the title of the piece. And I guess in case we don't get through it, long story short, I guess summarizing from memory from Scott's tweet about it, was that in the end, it may be the case that as we now look at a judiciary that is fully 1/4 has been appointed, the federal judiciary, by Donald Trump at this point, and we think about the long-term damage that that's going to do, how many of the people are unqualified, either literally having been found unqualified by the American Bar Association or found to be minimally qualified, but really in reality are unqualified, and are ideologues and are 13 years old and will be on the bench forever and comprise the bench, the literal bench, from which the appeals courts in later years will be built, because now they have judicial experience. But perhaps more damage has been done to, well, the overall liberal cause and the our approach to the rule of law. More damage may have been done by someone else other than Donald Trump. And the problem is otherwise he's a good Democrat. The case can be made here that Pat Leahy, Senator Leahy of Vermont, has done more long-term damage to Democrats and the rule of law in this country than even Donald Trump, by, well, being such a fool as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. The piece here begins, I think you can make a case that Pat Leahy did more damage to liberal interests than any individual Democratic senator of the Obama era, including the red state moderates. And he quotes here from the Vox piece by Ian Millhiser, entitled "What Trump Has Done to the Courts Explained." Okay? But he takes a different tack. So here, though, he takes a quote from Ian Millhiser's piece. The second reason for Trump's outsized impact on the judiciary is that when Democrats last controlled the Senate, one especially important Democrat, Judiciary Chair Pat Leahy, took an unusually expansive view of the rights of the minority party. We've talked about this before. An informal tradition known as the blue slip sometimes gives home state senators an exaggerated influence over who gets confirmed to federal judgeships within their states. The tradition gets its name from the blue slips of paper that home state senators use to indicate whether they approve of a particular nominee. Traditionally, the Senate Judiciary Committee showed some level of deference to senators who disapproved of their home state nominees, although the level of deference given to those senators varied widely depending on who chaired the committee and whether that committee chair was politically aligned with the incumbent president. Leahy, who chaired the committee for most of the Obama presidency, gave home state senators a simply extraordinary power to block judicial nominees. Before we run out of time, you'll remember that the backstory here is that Leahy, Republicans basically are gimmitarian about the blue slip thing. When they're in charge and they chair the committee, if a Democrat were to refuse to return a blue slip on a judicial nominee from a Republican president, Orrin Hatch, for instance, when he served as chairman, he basically said, well, it's interesting guidance, but it's not determinative here. We're just simply going to ignore the fact that a Democratic senator didn't return his blue slip. And that angered Pat Leahy greatly. And he thought the tradition ought to be that both blue slips had to come back. And he said, when the first time they lost the majority under George W. Bush, he said, when I'm restored to the chairmanship, I will restore the blue slip rule. And he did. And then Republicans basically used it from then on, and then throughout the Obama presidency later on, when once again, I think the balance of power shifted. Leahy was out and then he was back in. But he kept insisting that he was going to honor the full blue slip rule, that both blue slips had to be returned, even though Republicans had been gaming this for a long time. And they didn't even care even when a judge was nominated from a state with two Democratic senators and neither blue slip came back. They still didn't care. They would nominate those judges nonetheless. But Leahy thought, he really believed in principle that the blue slip rule was a good one, and that Democrats would somehow be rewarded for consistency by restoring it. And then for the entirety of the Obama administration, Republicans simply refused to return any blue slips at all. And No judges, no nominations went forward. A few deals were made where they would nominate somebody Republican or much more conservative just to get a vacancy filled. But in the end, they left 100 vacancies behind because of this. And then later, they were only there to preserve under Mitch McConnell because of what Leahy had done with the blue slips. And Millhiser and Lemieux here both point out that the original blue slip rule was actually an Old South segregationist rule. A very weird one, of course, that was designed to keep people of color off the bench and people who were too liberal. And reviving it revived a tradition that had no place in a modern progressive Senate.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Anyway, a very interesting piece that I will include for your reading over the weekend. As I said, it's a little bit somber because Pat Leahy is otherwise a very good Democrat and a good liberal, but I think he's made a gigantic mistake here that's going to impact history for a long time, and I really think there's just no way around taking the responsibility for it, sadly enough. Stay tuned, though, for Justice Putnam next.